Hello, I'm Jeremy Green from Machina Research, and I'd like to thank you all for joining our Smart Cities panel today, and I'd like to introduce our three experts. But before I do that, I'd like to remind you that you're not just passive recipients of this, you have the opportunity to contribute and in particular to ask questions of our panelists using the little window below the video feed that's on your screen. So our experts are Thorsten Robrecht, who is Head of Advanced Mobile Network Solutions at Nokia, Léan Doody, who is Smart Cities Leader at Arup, which is the Built Environment Consultancy, and Julian David, who is CEO of TechUK, the trade association representing digital technology in the UK. So thanks to all of you. And by way of introduction, I'd like to say that at Machina, we've been working with Nokia on a new a report which we call the Smart Cities Playbook, which has been looking at smart cities around the world and the different paths that they're following. And one of the things that struck us very forcibly was how much diversity there was in this area, not only in terms of the players that are involved, but in terms of the different journeys that the cities are taking. So we hope that our panel today is going to have some of that diversity and difference of opinion in a kind of polite and friendly way. And we hope that you're going to take part in that and contribute some more of it. So we've got as many views as we can have. So I'm going to start off with a question that I'm going to give to Léan as a built environment specialist. What do you think are the types of challenges that smart cities or that cities in general are facing today that are different from what they had to deal with 50 years ago?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So I think there's many challenges, but I think if I can boil it down to three, which are probably globally relevant. The first one is climate change and the challenges that we face from a warming planet, and the need for more resilience in our cities and the need for more adaptation and how we respond to those things within cities. The other one is the globalization and the role of cities as nodes in a kind of global network. And the impact that has in terms of how cities compete with each other for resources, for investment, for talent, but also the impact that's had on cities themselves in terms of inequality and elites, and also the relationship I think we've seen very clearly in this year is the relationship of the cities changing being different to the nation states. So the kind of people who are living in cities have different views, I think we've seen, to those in rural areas and the impact of that. And I think a lot of that is to do with globalization. The third one that I'll talk about is technology context and the how technology is changing society in terms of consumerization of technology. We all have mobile phones now, thanks to Nokia for that. That has had a huge impact on how people run their lives. I think what will impact more now is automation, and again, how the nature of work, how work will change. And I think the role of city government in all these things is changing. So the nature of city government itself is changing to deal, partly driven by these different challenges. So that's a sort of a roller coaster tour through some of the challenges that have changed.
Cool. Julian, if you were starting from scratch, if you had a clean slate, and you could build a smart city from scratch, which of course a luxury most of us don't have most of the time, but if you could, what would you do first?
Well, I think you need to do the same thing if you're starting from scratch as you have to on an established city. And I think the thing to remember is that one of the points that Léan made there is actually cities are made up of people. We're actually talking about smart communities here as much as smart cities. So that was emphasised just recently in the decision by a number of companies like ASOS and Google, Facebook, to actually invest in London. And the major reason they cited was talent and skills and diversity of those things available in the city. But if you take that as a given, that cities are there for a reason. The reason cities are growing is all of these things. But how would you encourage smart city growth? around that. It's down to the 3 C's, I think. It's connectivity, first and foremost, and that's obviously physical connectivity, but these days, of course, very much digital connectivity. You have to be able to join up all the things that are needed by the people in the city. The second thing is coordination. You have to have a government approach. You have to have governance that allows you to get all of the things you need for a smart city, smart community working together. So that's health, that's transportation, that's public administration, it's education as well. And that's often the very biggest challenge. So getting that sorted out is vital. And then it's about collaboration. And what happens there is to some extent, if you get those 2 things right up front, and you have the talent and you have a reason why the city is going to attract people, then you start to get collaboration between different types of industries, different types of activities, and that's what will build on it, because nobody knows exactly what the things that are going to drive and enliven and make a city really successful in this global context. So you've got to get people to collaborate, and things will come from that.
Thank you. Thorsten, as the saying goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So what's the first step that you would take if you wanted to help a city to become smart?
So, as you mentioned, right, so the first very much underlying prerequisite is really the connectivity part of it, right? This is what we see, where a lot of activities have been done already in the smart cities of the world. I would say, I would narrow it down a little bit into the mega cities probably, which are a little bit of a front runner in these domains. And we see that they are first start to build on now the connectivity layer first, be it fixed or mobile. So both of these, depending on the different use cases of the smart city application, because at the end it's all about solving a problem or doing some application, right? It's not about doing smart by the sake of being smart at that point. What we see, especially in the moment on our business domains with these mega cities, is that a lot of these activities start from the public safety angle. When you build the connectivity, and then the question is, right, do you build it based on a kind of commercial operator connectivity, or do you build a dedicated network, a dedicated structure for it, which is probably a better type of high resiliency, high secure, and I'm sure we're touching it later on, right, activities about what are the prerequisites or the requirements for this type of underlying connectivity somehow. So what we see, especially in a lot of mega cities, is nowadays really the first demand of security. Which means public safety, first responders. And then this type of infrastructure, which is typically built there, is then serving on top of it for all type of different use cases, which we certainly also talk about in the next minutes, which are then built of these type of environments. So I would say this pattern we are seeing in the moment all over the world, and it has started, I would say, about 2-3 years ago. It's not longer than this. So it's something very recently, but very massively, especially over this year now.
And just to follow up, because you mentioned the mega cities that you're engaging with, and I know Julian's already put in a plug for London, but
the only one in Europe.
Where do you think are, which cities around the world are leaders in this area?
So,
without denigrating anybody else, but who can we single out for praise?
So, if I would single out a single one, is the first mega city of the world which ever existed, which is New York, which since that point of time really kept the kind of cutting edge activity on this. I would say also recently in a study which also Machina did, which you also contributed to, I think it was very clearly seen there that New York is really leading the type of mega city of the world, and funnily enough being the first one of the 30s, right? And now we are in the range of the 60 mega cities somewhere. By the way, a nice coincidence, just 2% of the type of surface is by the megacities, while it is more than 50% of the population. So the densification of the world is really happening as we speak in these type of megacities. But building on this, after New York, right away afterwards, we see a lot of activities in the moment in the Middle East also. Middle East, obviously, and we will talk certainly also about this one later, has a lot of money also to spend, and they're a little bit of leapfrogging the kind of environment and building now dedicated structures for being a most competitive city and most competitive type of environment, attracting talents, attracting new type of industries, and so on. And then certainly around, whatever we see in Singapore, we've recently built there also the first narrowband IoT network for narrowband, right, connecting devices on low energy domains there. So also here we see this type of strong mega cities really taking the cutting edge.
Okay, thank you. It'd be nice to actually chat about our report and what we found about New York, which was, some of it was a surprise to me, but I'll enough about me. Something you touched on, Léan, was about the globalization and cities competing with each other. So what are the things that make cities attractive to both to capital and to people? And to what extent is that to do with what we're thinking of as smartness?
I think that Barcelona has done this very effectively. So they were one of the first cities to call themselves, to brand themselves, if you like, a smart city. And they had very strong top-down support from the mayor and the deputy mayor. And they had good governance within the city council, and they had a good plan. And they were able in that way to attract different companies to come in and trial stuff in the city. And they're also able to brand some of the district, one district in particular, 22 as a technology district. So they used the whole smart city thing very cleverly to both attract investment in physical, in developments, and then also in, to sort of create an innovation scene within the city. So I think that's a very good example of what can be done with this. I think that's becoming more difficult, though, because Barcelona had a first mover advantage, if you like, and now everyone is calling themselves a smart city in some shape or form. So I think now, in order to attract capital and talent, there needs to be a much stronger, believable plan around what you're doing. And you also need to have some baseline in terms of innovation clusters already happening. So I think the most important thing is to have a realistic plan. But I mean, I think there is still plenty of space to do that, and I think there's plenty of space to actually implement stuff, because there is a lot of. I think I agree with New York. New York is doing great things. I think Singapore is doing really interesting things. But those are places where they have invested in talent at the top to make that happen. So I think there's plenty of space to do stuff yet.
I would add to that the importance of culture.
Yeah.
It is a global phenomenon, the city, and if you're able to have an interesting, diverse culture that attracts people to come, so the arts are very important here, and you can see that in the growth of a lot of cities, and of course the arts are very technical and techno these days, but that combination of culture together with technology, together with innovation, really does start to spark an environment where people want to go. You can look at Berlin, the whole derivation of Berlin, how attractive that's become for techies.
And why will our kids want to go and live there?
Yeah, and it's become attractive for techies because the artists were there. Now the artists sometimes complain that when their techies arrive, the rents go up, etc., etc. But these things do feed together. That's what I was trying to get at in that point about collaboration. And you can see that also in the Middle East, very deliberate attempts to bring culture, either culture of the region or global culture, into the mix.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's interesting, of course, Barcelona's got a very strong local culture, but we're 15 minutes in and no one said Brexit yet. So, is it? I mean, what happened in Barcelona was that the citizens threw out that mayor. They elected a council and a mayor that was effectively opposed to the direction that the previous mayor had taken, and the smart city came up in the election. You talked a bit earlier on about the globalization, and you didn't use the word backlash, but that's what we're talking about here. How do cities engage the citizens with the smartness in such a way that doesn't make those people who are left behind feel left behind?
That is a really hard question. Thanks.
Well, you don't. And it's not just you to answer it.
No. I can have a go. Yeah, I think this is what really interesting. This is one of the very interesting challenges that lie ahead, particularly with increasing automation. And I think what we have to realise that it is a choice. That automation is a choice, and there is there are political choices to be made. It's not just the invisible hand of the market making these things happen. There is choice. So I think cities have choices about which technologies they choose to employ and how they employ them. I think in London, the very interesting example of a technology that's made things easier for people using the tube and using public transport is the Oyster cards, which are the smart cards, and now contactless payments. I think that sort of takes a little bit of friction out of people's lives. And what that's done in terms of labour and spatial terms is that it's removed the need for ticket offices, which means that people are redeployed around the stations to help. And I think that seems to have worked reasonably well. So there again, and that was a choice by TfL to do that. So I think you have to be focused on things that make people's lives better, and remember that it is choice. It's not just something that necessarily is going to happen. It's not techno-determinism.
But I think again. What this comes back to is taking a look at the whole of the population of the city and working out how to make that work for everybody. The biggest challenge is usually housing, because that's the thing that makes it difficult for people who are not in the more highly paid jobs or the more interesting areas. How do they manage that? And that extends also to business premises. If you get to a situation where your city doesn't have a diversity of both housing and business premises, then you're going to be giving yourself a problem into the future. But these things are solvable. Where technology comes in is exactly the point Léan was making, is you can actually use technology to utilise things more efficiently, more effectively, so you can get more out of the city. In fact, you need to. Again, I'm going to quote another London statistic at you, Jeremy, but there's the equivalent of 2 tube trains worth of people arriving to live in London every week. So, not only you've got to get them on the tube, you've also got to find them somewhere to live, you've got to find them places to go, where they can shop, where they can eat, etc., etc. All of that lot really needs a very coordinated plan. It needs a purpose and a vision. Again, there are examples of cities that take the technology thing the wrong way. So they try and optimise congestion for vehicles, when actually what they should be doing is building metros. Yep. So you mustn't get dragged away from the idea that basics still have to be there. What technology allows you to do is manage those basics so much better and put them into a coordinated approach, so you can have every type of transport managed and coordinated.
I would also pitch in just to complement. What I'm seeing all around the world from the different customers is that transportation, in particular public transportation, is really the one which you get easiest connected to the population, where the hurdle is very low, where it can be relatively easy implemented a real impact to the population, which is seen very positively and not as intrusive or so. While things like drones and so on are getting much more complicated in a kind of acceptance factor. But public transportation, public transportation, and then things like smart parking and so on, which are not yet there, or just islands of these are really things which changes people's life, which puts away a burden of, let's say, I'm waiting, I don't know when the train is coming, it's full, how can I pre-book it, where can I get my ticket, and so on. So this thing is really, for me, the easy catch, which I'm seeing in some of the examples.
And a reminder to people who are watching that we're looking forward to your questions. And while we're waiting for a question to come rolling in, we've talked a lot about, obviously, technology because we're on smart cities, and we've talked about connectivity, and we've mentioned narrowband IoT. What are some of the other technologies that we think are enablers for cities to become smarter?
I'll put two up for that. One is batteries, energy storage. If you think about the origin of cities in the first place, they were enabled, people were able to move into big cities because we solved the energy problem. We moved from wood to coal, and coal is much easier to move around and store, and you can have massive amounts of energy, and then of course by extension electricity generated by coal. What we're now looking at as we deal with the implications of climate change, but also air quality, general health, another way to do that, you've got to find a way to store energy. And I think one of the most interesting areas is these sort of power walls for residences or other types of storage. Need it for our small devices, but we particularly need it for living units, business units, and everything else. So that's one. The second one I would throw in, Jeremy, is bicycles, which you might not think is a fantastic technology, but it is, and it's fitted within an integrated, flexible transport system. The bicycle is a fantastic add-on. Also brings the various health benefits, but it allows people to do that flexible movement in a city in the way that's not really going to be possible. Certainly not in the old model of a car. You can go to any of the mega cities around the world; they don't work in terms of cars. So I think that's a technology that will continue to bring benefits.
Let me pitch. I think these are already the non-obvious ones, right? Which thanks for raising it. Right, this is what I thought originally on it.
Yeah.
Battery definitely is a very decisive factor, and battery lifetime also when you get to connected elements and sensor and everything. But again, from the connectivity side, for sure, we see now all of this already happening in the moment as we speak. Be it now the fixed connectivity, which is a very important part, right? So a lot of people think that mobile connectivity is the type of first thing for type of smart city, but it's not. So very clearly, all of the fixed connectivity of all of the energy steering, which we have today, like smart lamp poles and so on. So these are really things which are existing right now already as a little bit of islands or vertical solutions, which are now complemented during 2016 and 2017 especially, now with all of the mobility parts of it. And you mentioned narrowband IoT on top of these existing networks on operator spaces, which is pretty much a European focus. Well, when you look in US, there's a lot about Cat-M, which offers a broader type of broadband usage on this one, up to a megabit per second, basically on this. And then there's also still on the good old GSM, we see the EC-GSM still happening in a lot of worlds, while some are switching off their GSM networks. Still here also now the kind of connected elements and smartness of the elements steps in even with the good old GSM modules on this. All of this together, at the end, it boils down exactly to what you say, energy is key. So if you're not able to make it with a battery lifetime over 10 years or whatever for a sensor, which you don't need to touch then at that point, then you're failing. So it needs to be properly managed that this device is there forever, or at least 10 years. And then is properly connected and all the data can be retrieved. And then all the intelligence steps on top of it, and then all the different type of use cases and applications.
All right, so if we're so rich, why aren't we smart? What are the obstacles? Why isn't this happening already? What is stopping this from happening?
I think one of the big things is leadership and capacity within local and central, national, regional government. So I think that there is, in most places, a lack of understanding about the potential of technology, but also the way in which technology disrupts the traditional ways of doing things in terms of opportunities and negatives. And I think what we're starting to see is the political process bumping up against some of these things. So you see it with Airbnb, you've seen it with Uber, we're seeing in several European countries, say WhatsApp being pulled in for privacy violations. So we're starting to see that bumping up, and particularly in cities with particularly Uber, but also Airbnb and also other platforms. And that's a sort of consequence of not really understanding exactly how these things are going to play out in terms of the built environment and labour markets and the consumer and what they want. But also the flip side of that is then also not understanding exactly the opportunities. And I think we have to change how government engages with technology, but also engages with the collaboration piece that you talked about, because none of these solutions that we talk about are deliverable by a single entity. They're not deliverable by government on its own. They're not deliverable by technology companies on their own. They need lots of different. And I think actually instead of competing, we need more. This sounds like, motherhood and apple pie, but we need more, collaboration and people with the skill to collaborate, because I think that's really important. A lot of people don't. It's not easy, and it's almost something that should be taught in schools, how you actually collaborate with people, because it has a much greater overhead than if you just do it yourself. But that's what we need.
One of the things that always upsets me when I watch The Apprentice is how much it emphasises the skill of sticking it to your colleagues rather than collaborating with them, which isn't, real life's not like that. And that's another question. And talking of questions, thanks very much for the questions that are coming in from the audience now. There are lots of them, they're all really good. One that I'd like to ask to all of you is the relative importance of, if you like, centralised infrastructure, that's sensors and connected devices that are owned by the municipality, versus devices that belong to the crowd, whether that's connected cars or smartphones in people's hands. Anything to say about the role of the second components in smart cities?
Thorsten, I would say, they go hand in hand. This is what you're trying to say with collaboration. What you have to have as a basis is you have to have an infrastructure that allows things to be incorporated, and you have to have a governance that actually has a manageable number of people that can actually control and bring different things to the party. So health, education, built environment, energy, infrastructure and connectivity. If you end up, as we do sometimes in the UK, with 20 to 30 people, if you try and get all that lot together in a room, 20 to 30 organisations, many of whom don't have the city boundaries as their starting point, then you're seriously in trouble already. But then having, if you can solve that problem and you bite off big chunks of it, then you get to the point of saying, okay, well, let's put the basics in, let's make it flexible, let's make it open. If it's not open, then again, you will not be smart. So that's the point at which you do the handover, I think, Thorsten, to the private individual and to companies and to innovators who can then plug and play. A great example of that, again, was what TfL did, which is now also done in every other city around the world. Just open up transport data, open up data that was previously thought to be just the property of the transport authority.
I think that, like somebody says, right, the new currency of the next decade is data, right? Which has a high value of this one. Let's think this through one step further. When you, as an end consumer, myself, if I get connected with whatever, and I'm a pretty techie guy and I like to be connected and so on, but I want to be sure that the connectivity which is there and the ones who are managing my data as a first spot or stop, basically, that this is reliable, that this is secure, that I can trust it and so on. If I get a too much defragmented type of environment and society and I don't know exactly where it ends up and who's all using it and which network and so on, I don't feel comfortable as an end consumer of really exposing all my type of privacy and all my type of information to this type of totally unregulated, totally ad hoc type of environments there. So in this sense, for me, it's very important, and I think for the acceptance of the people, because at the end it's people topics which we talk here about, it's that there is a trust in, there is a security in, that there is a kind of clear transparency in how this data and how this smartness is done and developed somehow. So I think let's not underestimate this, right? If we just lead it Wild West going on, it will not happen. And it will be some techies using it, but then it will not make it into real type of mass market on this.
The industry's answer to securing the consent of individuals to use their data has been those 97-page end-user license agreements,
exactly.
which nobody reads. We know
Yes.
we don't
No.
read them. We don't know what we're consenting to. At the point that you want to install this app, you just tick that box.
Exactly. And what is the funny part is that still a lot of people think that, okay, I've got a Vodafone subscription or I've got an O2 subscription or so. So my operator is responsible for this, even though I'm running a kind of WhatsApp or whatever on top of it, which is totally different type of thing. But the first perception of the end consumer is often that, okay, I've got my subscription or my connectivity with this or that individual or company, and therefore I'm feeling good, I'm feeling sure. They're also making bank transaction and so on, which is a false assumption. Absolutely, right? We all know this, but still answering it and bringing it to the next decade is we need to find a way to answer how we make it reliable and how we make it secure.
And provide people with the privacy that they think
Exactly.
they ought to have. So
Exactly.
any thoughts on that? How do we let people, on the one hand, monetize that new currency that we're talking about, data, without pissing everybody off so badly that the whole thing falls to bits?
I think there's a lot of challenges.
It is.
Because I think that a lot of people don't know how their data is being monetized. For example, the mobile companies, you know, they see a great new revenue stream in location-based information of their customers. I am pretty sure that most customers don't know that their data is being used, anonymized and so on, but they don't know. They think, well, I'm paying my subscription. They don't know that they're also a revenue source. And that may come and bite the mobile companies, it may not, but they're by no means alone. I mean, every app that you use, if you're not paying for it, then you're the revenue stream in some way.
Sure.
And I think people aren't really aware of that. And I think that it's a situation that's evolving very quickly, and it's quite hard for people to catch up. And I don't know, maybe there will be some catastrophic event that will force everyone to look at it, or maybe it'll be a drip, 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 you know, of things like, you know, what's the European Commission or European Community taking various people, because they're actually, I think the EU is being a lot more proactive than in this area in terms of data privacy than, for example, in the US and some other regions. So perhaps that will, they will figure out a way to balance that privacy versus, you know, because this data is tremendously valuable and you could do great things with it, but not at the cost of people's, you know.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a balance here because if you don't have the right to control of your data, ownership is a very difficult concept in this space, by the way, because a lot of this data is incidental to you, and it belongs to other things that you're interacting with as much as it does to you. So I think it's more about control. It's more about usage rights, and I think the balance is going to be gained if you get the level of protection available to the citizen, which again is often really just making sure they know that it's open, so that things are transparent and they can understand or find out what's going on, versus the innovation. And it's been a debate for some time. We now have Gdpr, which is the European Union standard, which will apply here, Brexit or no Brexit, and which is probably a reasonable base to look at. Again, the point is that you then hopefully get that marriage of trust and flexibility. And then I think it comes down to the age-old thing. You know, if you go to the lawyer for clause 12 in section 6 of a 97-page document, that we're all going to hell in a handcart, aren't we? So it's going to be about brands and the trust that companies have with their consumers, and about societies and the trust that they have with their citizens. And that's where I think we should be spending our time. And often that's a case of, first of all, transparency, secondly, telling people what goes on. You look at what happened with care.data, the UK health collection data, and still goes on every time anybody proposes using any sort of medical data to do something really beneficial. It really does get people very excited. In Germany, they don't seem to mind that. They get the point.
Which is funny because generally Germany is
but on
terribly
the other
fussy
hand,
about this kind of thing.
On the other hand, we're quite happy to be photographed every sort of 100 yards of our journey anywhere by CCTV and other types of monitoring, and the Germans really find that unbelievable. So I think it's trust, and it fits within the culture of society, but you need that sort of minimum level of regulation to build upon.
And I think the regulation also comes in the security side of things, because you have to be able to trust that the people holding your data are actually looking after it. And I think we have seen many examples at all kinds of levels of people's personal data being breached. So I think there does need to be some minimum standards there as well.
Yeah, and the smarter the community in the city becomes, of course, it's not just getting data, which is a bad enough issue, but you can actually interfere with what's going on. That the infrastructure becomes digitised. Now that is also potentially subject to malicious attack.
Yes.
Or just mischievous attack.
Yes. Yeah. Which is a huge can of worms.
Yes.
Should we just lift up the lid a little bit and peek in to that can of worms? What are the basics for making for ensuring that your city can become smarter without becoming more vulnerable?
I think it's a huge issue because I think that the capability in terms of being able to attack systems is growing and growing and growing, and it's also becoming the sort of knowledge sharing and innovation is also working in that arena, in terms of how best to attack different systems and hack things. So I think it will have to be worked out. There is a lot of work going into cybersecurity of systems. I think there does need to be more work, and I think again it's a conversation with the public as well in terms of how, because the thing about security is you can make something very secure, but there is an overhead associated with that. So there's also a conversation around, well, how much overhead are you willing to put up with in order to, basically use this system?
It's a bit like having to take your belt off at the airport, isn't it?
Yeah, which is kind of pointless, But that's the whole theatre. But there is that overhead. So I think again that will be an evolving conversation in terms of, well, how much overhead and how much security do we put this, and at what point does that start to affect usability?
I think that three parties involved: the government and law enforcement. And law enforcement has really got to up its game in terms of its understanding and capability in this space, and setting the right infrastructure to defend the right resources to defend our infrastructure. I think the second thing is our industry, but every industry. I mean, we're talking about transportation here, we're talking about building design and management, we're talking about utilities, we're talking about health activity. All of those industries have got to get the security message, and they've got to invest in it in the same way that the more obvious tech companies and mobile phone companies need to do. And then the last thing is the individual users. First of all, they've got to work out what that bargain is between convenience. I want it now. I don't want to go through all this security stuff. I want to leave my belt on. They've got to, what's the bargain there? And then secondly, they've also got to think about things differently. We're all used to locking the door, but people leave their passwords. And in particular, things that you buy once, put somewhere, and never see again. Until something goes wrong with it, you don't think about, is that secure, in the same way that you might do with your phone or whatever.
Wi-Fi kettle.
A Wi-Fi kettle, yes.
And I think
I'm sure that's a good idea, but I can't quite think why.
But I think the technologies are there, right? So it's not a question about technology at the first glance. It's about how we really want to do and how much we're accepting what you mentioned on this one. So we have recently gained, when we did some kind of a private networks for fully automated self-driving issues like in mines and so on. So these are also very vulnerable at the end because everything is totally automated, everything gets type of connected and so on. It's a kind of small, very, very small microscopic smart city in a sense of an environment. And also here for sure there's a lot of $1 million game in there about getting this properly managed, and we put a lot of emphasis on exactly this type of security. How can we prevent hackers getting into this one, and how can we make sure that people are really protected who are working in this environment and so on. I would say from technology perspective it's all there and has been proven on smaller scale type of environments. The question is how can we scale this to really big cities with all type of millions of users and so on. But it's more a social question and a responsibility question than a technology question at the end.
Which leads very nicely onto one of the questions we've had come in from the audience from Diana, who has brought up something that we were talking about before we went live about driverless cars. She was asking, well, first of all, about what the ethical and public acceptance issues are around driverless cars, but also when we think they're going to be commonplace in our cities. So. No penalties for being wrong about this. So.
Let me kick it off properly because it's close to my heart, this activity which we're doing, especially on the German environment. We're in the car industry, which is a fundamental industry in Germany, and who's not at the forefront right now on the self-driving things. Right? If you think about Tesla and the other things, which are much more ahead of this. So since about a year now, we are running a kind of connected car environment on a German highway life between Nuremberg and Munich with some of the German car industry areas there. And we are trying to understand the question about ethics and so on, which is a bit of a different thing, and looking at the same time to technology issues first. If you think from the ministerial perspective, and a lot of this is steered from the governmental side also of building now and bridging the industries of the heavy industry together with the IT or connectivity industry. These are two different industries which needs to work now closely together to make this really happen. If you think some of the legislation part, they think about that in 5 years' time we will see this massively inside the cities. And it starts all with the transportation areas there, be it taxis, be it Ubers, self-driving type of Ubers and so on. Again, technology-wise, it is possible. We've been doing this in some areas. Okay, is it robust enough and is it ethically clarified enough? No, in this moment. Is 5 years time frame a realistic time frame? You can debate it, right? And this gets back and forth. But at least from the European Union perspective and from the governmental perspective, they've got a strong desire that in 5 years there's a massive self-driving environment into the smart cities. And then it will transform from that point onwards the entire city environment. So do you need parking lots then anymore? How do you manage the traffic? Do you need traffic lights anymore? And you can imagine then all type of flavors right, on this environment. So.
Yeah. So it won't happen evenly everywhere.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think we're not going to see self-driving cars in the City of London anytime very soon, because I think it's too complicated. I think that first of all, we don't have the connectivity network to allow it to happen here. I worry about self-driving cars in a way because I worry that about a like-for-like. I think we should be moving towards fewer cars rather than a swap. So I think we need different models for how these things will be used. So taxis and self-driving buses are great. Maybe shuttling up and down motorways is good, but I think everyone having their own self-driving car is not going to be a good use of the Earth's precious resources, to be honest. But they do have lots of really interesting potential. And as someone without a driving license, they couldn't come soon enough.
I mean, look, it should be what we should be talking about here is connected transport systems. Very interesting. Volkswagen's recent announcement. Ford also doing the same, starting to think of themselves as a transportation company rather than a product company. where will that go? But I think that fits into an integrated system. The starting point is, are you set up to manage these things? And some of them can be self-driving. The technology, as Thorsten said, is sort of there as we speak. But you need the infrastructure. I mean, just something like putting 5G into London is an incredible concept because of the amount of stuff that has to go on the outside of buildings or lampposts or whatever, and the planning cycles that are involved in dealing with that, etc., etc. You know, but let's assume those things are going to come. Where are you going to see it? Obviously, you're going to see it in new cities. You're going to see it in cities with a big space, so they can separate to deal with some of the issues here, you know, separate that sort of transport from the human transport. You're going to see it in places where there's slightly better behaviour. I suspect you might have seen this, one of the tabloids picked up on the fact that Jack the Lad drivers will see a self-driving car as something just to bully out of the way, because they know it's going to stop. So they can, you know, but I think it's going to come in augmenting existing transport systems. It can have, and it can be good for the environment. I don't agree with you on that, Léan, because you know if you have fully utilised cars, most cars aren't utilised. I mean, they're 2, 3, 4, 5%. And if you have these things with the right sort of energy, which is going to be some form of electricity, then you know you reduce the number of them, because they're continually picking up the demand, you know, and their utilisation goes up to you know X 90 whatever %. So again, if you get it into a smart system, so you know. This is sort of coming. You see this in the Uber stuff. You see it in Get. You see it in Lyft, in other organisations like that, where they know where the vehicles are and they can connect you. This platform effect, so you don't have that random thing. You can manage the random thing much better. So I think in new cities, I think 5 years. You get that kind of thing. Older cities and the broader environments can be longer.
Yeah, best of luck with Rome. I'm going to call a halt, guys, because we're just scratching the surface. There's lots more that we could talk about, but I think we're more or less out of time. Thanks to the three of you, and thanks to the people outside who've been sending in their questions. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to address all of them. You can... if you've enjoyed this, you can watch it again. I think there'll be a link at the end. So thanks very much to the panellists, and thanks to all of you.